Hello viewers, today I'm going to be discussing an essay called Queer Utopias and a Feminist Iranian Vampire, a critical analysis of resistive monstrosity in A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night by Abdi Calafell, which I will refer to from now on as Queer Utopias. It discusses the movie A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, AGWAN for short, and I will be comparing it to Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula. In Queer Utopias, Abdi and Calafell discuss the evolution of how the vampire has been traditionally portrayed, how that portrayal has morphed, and how the film AGWAN departs from these portrayals in significant and important ways. Abdi and Calafell discuss how monsters become a frame for understanding the cultures that produce them, and how vampires represent the reciprocal relationship between fear and desire. When we compare the vampires in Dracula to AGWAN, both must be read in the context of the culture that created them. For example, in Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula, the titular monster, is initially a tall old man with a long white moustache, the very embodiment of patriarchal oppression and power, whereas Abdi and Calafell describe the girl in AGWAN as a forlorn, chador-wearing feminist vampire vigilante. The differences are physical, cultural, and unambiguous. Stoker's culture is late Victorian, at the height of British colonialism, but where feminists were demanding equal rights for women. Homosexuality was still considered unnatural and was a crime. Stoker wrote Dracula while Oscar Wilde, a man who had once courted Stoker's wife, was incarcerated for homosexual acts, and feminists were calling out the hypocrisy of respectable pillars of society with syphilis infecting their wives. In contrast, Anna Lily Amirpour's atheist Iranian parents left Tehran at the start of the Iranian Revolution in 1979. She was brought up in California, thus her film must be examined with the contrasts of Iranian political and economic history and the divergent lived experiences of Iranian American feminists in mind. Abdi and Calafell's paper defined queer spaces as those on the borderlands, where the strange or out of place live. One must be a shapeshifter, able to navigate constantly changing terrains. So, using this definition of queer space, Bad City is a mix of spaghetti western border town and a horror landscape with bodies lying unquestioned out in the open. It is this in-between place that the characters must navigate. Therefore, although the vampire girl doesn't physically shapeshift, as does Dracula when he turns into wolves, bats and mist, she must shift how she reacts in certain situations, such as her encounters with Saeed, who is the pimp, Arash, the James Dean lookalike love interest, and Atty, the prostitute. It could be argued that Dracula's castle is also this borderland place. Jonathan Harker's first encounter with it is at night. It's suddenly peering out of the gloom, a vast ruined castle with frowning walls and the feeling of being in a dream world. It is the borderland between the real world and the monstrous, which Harker is about to navigate. AGWAN itself is another borderland. A black and white movie in a world of colour. Bad City, a fictional Iranian town, is filmed in California. A vampire wears a chador, a garment that represents what Western feminists traditionally think of as oppressive attire. That chador allows the girl to be simultaneously hidden and visible. An aspect of the vampire that is apparent in Dracula as well. His mesmeric gaze and ability to dissolve into mist allows him to disappear into the shadows. Abdi and Calafell argue that similar to heteronormative panics around queerness, often being seen or unspoken, one of the potential strengths of vampires is their monstrosity is not always visible. Indeed, we must judge them for their actions rather than what they are. In AGWAN, the girl is an avenger, her chador a superhero's cape, as she preys on the misbehaving men of Bad City. She queers the narrative in several ways. Here, she is the penetrator, piercing the men with her teeth. She is the only one wearing a chador, queering the narrative of the Western feminists that Muslim women need saving. By the end of the film, both Atty and Arash know she is a monster, but they accept it. In contrast, Dracula's hunting of the opposite sex is for another reason entirely. He is creating more vampires, ones that seem to be the true killers. Dracula lures his victims, mesmerising them, slowly sending them into a decline, whereas it appears once the women have changed to vampires, they immediately become filled with bloodlust. And Stoker has also queered the narrative here, turning the female vampires into creatures that eat babies, the exact opposite of the nurturing mother. Heteronormative success equates with advancement, money, family and hope. Thus, Dracula's quest for progeny, power over others, and a more favourable position than Transylvania could be seen to be fulfilling the expected desires of society, whereas Abdi and Calafell argue the girl, unlike most other vampires, is not in search of progeny, but a community. She ignores Saeed's money, but gives Ati his gold. She is a protector of women, a feminist monster. Stoker's Dracula is the opposite, a patriarchal archetype, a parasite that turns women into monsters and bleeds them dry. The vampire as monster has evolved in the years since queerness has become more accepted. From Dracula, who is the central titular character, some say representing the unnaturalness of homosexuality, to the girl, who has no name or background, but represents those who have previously been unseen and unheard, but can now fight back. It will be interesting to see where this trope moves on to in the future.